Welcome the Lord's chosen. Power doesn't panic when it's loud. It panics when it realizes it made a mistake. There's a moment in every high-level power structure where confidence quietly disappears. Not with alarms, not with shouting, with a pause, with a recalculation, with someone powerful leaning back and saying, "Leave that one alone." That moment isn't dramatic on the surface, but behind it, entire plans are being shredded. Here's a fact most people never hear. Billionaires don't handle threats personally. They outsource pressure. They hire people whose entire job is to make problems vanish cleanly, quietly, and permanently. These enforcers don't scare easily, don't shake often, and definitely don't hesitate unless something has gone very wrong. So when one of them stamps a name with "do not touch," that's not kindness, it's damage control. Because understand this, nobody gets that label by being harmless. You get it by becoming expensive, not in money, money is replaceable, but in consequences, in exposure, in ripple effects that can't be reversed once triggered. Somewhere along the line, someone realized that touching you doesn't end a problem. It starts a chain reaction, and powerful people hate chain reactions almost as much as they hate paper trails. What makes this even more unsettling is that the order didn't come with noise, no threats, no confrontation, just a sudden shift. The same people who watched you closely now look away. The same pressure that hovered around you suddenly vanished. That's not peace, that's recalibration. That's the sound of power stepping back because it miscalculated. And here's where it gets interesting, almost funny if you enjoy irony. The enforcer isn't shaking because you're aggressive, loud, or reckless. He's shaking because you're none of those things. You didn't self-destruct, you didn't fold. You didn't give them the mess they were prepared to clean up. You stayed functional. You stayed observant. You stayed alive in ways they didn't plan for. This isn't a story about dominance. It's a story about restraint, timing, and the quiet terror that hits when influence realizes it can't predict you anymore. When the system that usually touches everyone suddenly decides to keep its hands to itself. That's not random. That's recognition. And once that mark is placed, nothing around you operates the same again. Number one, the do not touch order means you crossed from target to liability. There's a huge difference between being a target and being a liability, and power understands that difference very well. Targets are manageable. They can be pressured, cornered, exhausted, or quietly removed from the equation. A liability is different. A liability creates problems simply by being touched. When that label shifts, the entire strategy changes. When you were a target, everything about you was viewed as controllable. Your reactions were predictable. Your limits were assumed. The system believed it understood how far it could go without consequences. But something happened along the way that broke that assumption. You didn't respond the way the model expected. You didn't collapse, lash out recklessly, or disappear. You stayed intact in ways that messed with their calculations. Once you become a liability, touching you no longer solves anything. It creates exposure. It invites attention. It opens doors that were supposed to stay sealed. People higher up start asking uncomfortable questions, not about you, but about the wisdom of the person who wants to move against you. That's when hands start pulling back. This shift usually happens quietly, no apology, no announcement, just a sudden drop in pressure. Conversations stop, including your name. Moves that were planned get postponed. The same people who once leaned forward now lean away. That's not mercy. That's risk management. Power is obsessed with avoiding uncontrollable outcomes, and you became one. Not because you threatened anyone, but because your existence started carrying too many unknowns. What would happen if they pushed again? Who would notice? What would surface? What else might unravel that they don't have the time, energy, or leverage to clean up? That's why the order matters. Do not touch doesn't mean you're protected. It means you're radioactive to the wrong kind of attention. It means any harm done to you now costs more than it's worth. You crossed a line they didn't expect you to survive crossing. And when power realizes it turned someone into a liability, instead of eliminating them early, it doesn't double down. It backs away slowly and pretends it was never interested in the first place. Number 2, enforcers don't protect feelings, they protect outcomes. An enforcer isn't paid to care how anyone feels about a situation. Their loyalty isn't to emotions, fairness, or even reputation. It's to results. Clean results. Predictable results. Results that don't spiral into problems someone else has to explain later. That's the mindset they operate from, and it's ruthless in its simplicity. When an enforcer steps in, every decision is filtered through one question. Does this move end the issue, or does it multiply it? If the answer is multiplication, they stop, not because they're soft, but because chaos is bad business. Enforcers survive by being efficient, not dramatic. So when someone like that decides to back off, it means the desired outcome is no longer guaranteed. Touching you doesn't bring closure, it brings uncertainty. And uncertainty is poison in high-level environments where one misstep can unravel years of carefully managed influence. What's unsettling is that this decision usually isn't loud. There's no confrontation, no warning. The pressure just disappears. Not because the interest is gone, but because the math changed. Someone ran through the scenarios and realized every path forward led to complications they didn't sign up for. Enforcers are trained to read patterns quickly. They notice who collapses under pressure and who adapts. They notice who panics and who becomes sharper. They notice when resistance doesn't look emotional but measured. That's when alarms go off in their head. Not fear alarms, risk alarms. Backing off isn't weakness in their world. It's discipline. It's the understanding that forcing an outcome when conditions aren't right creates long-term damage. And long-term damage reflects badly on the person who caused it. So if you were marked, "Do not touch," it's not because someone suddenly felt sorry for you. It's because the outcome they were hired to deliver slipped out of reach. Whatever they expected to happen didn't happen. You didn't play your role properly. You stayed standing. You stayed aware. You didn't give them a clean ending. And when an enforcer can't guarantee a clean ending, they don't gamble. They retreat, document the risk, and move on. Feelings never entered the equation. Only the result, and the fact that touching you no longer produces the one they were promised. Number 3, the shaking isn't fear of you. It's fear of what touching you triggers. What most people get wrong about power and its enforcers is thinking their reactions are always about you personally. They're not. They're about the ripple effect your existence creates. When someone like an enforcer starts shaking, it isn't because you've grown bigger, stronger, or scarier in a physical sense. It's because you're unpredictable, and unpredictability in their world is dangerous. Every move they make is calculated. Every action has consequences that are weighed, measured, and often rehearsed. When they hesitate or show signs of nervousness, it's because the chain reaction of touching you cannot be contained. One misstep could spark exposure, retaliation, or chaos that no amount of money, influence, or loyalty can fix. That's the real terror. Not that you'll attack, but that attacking you breaks the system around them. In high-level circles, control is everything. Systems are built to contain, manipulate, and neutralize variables. You were a variable they thought they controlled. Then you moved differently. You reacted in ways that their models didn't account for. And now touching you isn't just a risk. It's a domino waiting to fall, one that could destroy structures, reputations, and plans meticulously built over years. This shaking is an admission, silent but undeniable. It says, we cannot predict what will happen next, and that scares us more than anything else. Enforcers thrive on predictability. They live and die by it. When the ground beneath their strategy becomes uncertain, their confidence cracks. They know the cost of being wrong is higher than anything else they face daily. So when you're marked untouchable, understand this. It's not because they overestimated your danger in the moment. It's because they underestimated the consequences of doing anything at all. You've become a variable too volatile to manipulate, a presence too precise to misjudge. And in that precision, in that calm strength they cannot read or control, you've turned the system itself into something that fears touching you. That's why he's shaking. Number 4, you've been flagged as too connected to silence. Silence isn't absence. It's presence in its purest, most dangerous form. And power knows this better than anyone. When someone realizes that your silence carries weight, that your restraint isn't ignorance or fear, that's when alarms go off. You've been flagged because you communicate without words, because every pause you take has consequences they can't calculate. That's far more threatening than open aggression, and far harder to control. In the world of enforcers and high-level power, words are currency, and silence is a weapon. People speak to assert control, to test limits, to gather information. But when you stop playing their game, when you refuse to react on cue, you break the patterns they rely on. Every unanswered taunt, every unprovoked attack you absorb without escalating, every omission you make in their narrative, these are signals the system doesn't know how to handle. They aren't used to variables that hold their peace with such precision, yet still shift the balance. Being too connected to silence means your awareness extends beyond what they can see, and your restraint is strategic. It's as if you're quietly gathering all the receipts, watching the dominoes fall, and letting the system expose itself. They may never know the full extent of what you've observed, but they can sense it. The hesitations, the glances, the sudden pause in action, they're all responses to your invisible presence. This kind of power scares those who rely on intimidation because it can't be bargained with, bullied, or bargained away. You've become unpredictable not by reacting wildly, but by staying composed, alert, and unshakable. The more connected you are to this quiet strength, the more fragile their confidence becomes. They realize that touching you or trying to manipulate you won't just fail, it will backfire in ways they cannot foresee. When an enforcer recognizes this, he doesn't move impulsively. He steps back. He recalculates. Because in high-stakes environments, silence isn't empty. It's a ledger of influence, and you've just marked yourself untouchable. Number 5, this order didn't come from emotion. It came from data. Power rarely moves on feelings. Decisions at that level are cold, precise, and often brutal, because emotion is unreliable and mistakes are expensive. When an enforcer marks someone, do not touch, it's not because of sympathy, pity, or moral hesitation. It's because the numbers, patterns, and intelligence say that touching you is a risk they cannot afford. Every move they make is calculated, measured against outcomes, and weighed for potential fallout. You didn't get that label because they liked you. You got it because the data told them the consequences of acting are worse than letting you be. Think of it like a high-stakes equation running in real time. Every action against you, every potential threat, every possible retaliation is factored in. They map your connections, your history, your timing, and even your silence. They simulate every scenario they can imagine, and then a single conclusion emerges. Leaving you alone is safer than engaging. That's not fear, that's optimization. That's a system recognizing a variable it cannot control. This also explains why the shift happens without fanfare. Power doesn't need to justify its decisions publicly when its own internal metrics have already spoken. No threats, no warnings, no explanations, just an adjustment in the strategy because the data dictates it. Enforcers are trained to execute orders efficiently, but when the numbers flip, they hesitate, recalculate, and step back. What makes this so profound is that it exposes the real mechanics of influence. You weren't saved by charm, by luck, or by morality. You were saved by the unavoidable logic of consequences. The system evaluated the cost, ran the probability, and concluded that acting against you now is too dangerous, too messy, and too unpredictable. So when an enforcer marks you untouchable, understand this. It's not about you as a person. It's about what your existence triggers in the algorithm of power. You've become a node that the system cannot handle without risk. Every pattern, every calculation, every chain reaction they simulate confirms one truth. You are untouchable because the math says so, and that is far more compelling than any human feeling could ever be. Number 6, you survived long enough to disrupt their script. Power always has a script. Every move, every threat, every calculation is designed to fit into a neat sequence where outcomes are predictable and control is absolute. They expect people to follow the pattern, to break when they're supposed to react in ways that make the system look flawless. You survived longer than they anticipated, and in doing so, you shattered that script. Every day you stayed standing. Every time you navigated pressure without crumbling. Every moment you maintained clarity in chaos. It rewrote the narrative they thought they controlled. When someone doesn't follow the expected path, it forces power to pause. Plans that were supposed to be airtight suddenly look vulnerable. Decisions that were supposed to be simple now carry unknown consequences. You didn't just survive, you disrupted the rhythm they rely on. Their certainty falters because the script was built for predictable responses, not someone who recalibrates under pressure and refuses to break. That disruption creates unease at every level. Enforcers who once moved confidently now hesitate. Orders get second-guessed. Conversations that were supposed to intimidate or manipulate hit walls. Your endurance transforms from a personal victory into a structural problem for them. You became a variable that doesn't obey rules, and powerful people fear variables more than opposition. They can't control them, and they can't measure the fallout. Your survival isn't accidental. It's a combination of timing, restraint, and awareness that keeps you one step ahead. The more you outlast their expectations, the more unpredictable you become. They start recalculating constantly, unsure how to proceed without creating consequences they can't contain. That's why the "do not touch" order emerges. It's an acknowledgement that you've become too complicated to manage through force, pressure, or fear. Surviving long enough to disrupt their script doesn't make you safe. It makes you untouchable. It proves that control isn't absolute and that power, no matter how wealthy, influential, or ruthless, has blind spots. You became one of them, a glitch in the system, and glitches are never ignored. They're either erased or avoided. In your case, they chose avoidance. Number 7. The enforcer sees something his employer doesn't fully understand. There's a layer of perception in power that most people never notice. The boss sees the overall picture, the strategy, the long-term vision. The enforcer sees the cracks, the subtle signals, the misalignments, the tiny inconsistencies that could explode if ignored. When an enforcer marks someone as untouchable, it's often because he's noticed something his employer hasn't fully processed yet. You've become an anomaly in their system, a presence that doesn't fit neatly into the patterns they rely on. Enforcers operate on instinct and experience, but their instincts are sharpened by data, observation, and repetition. They notice behaviors that aren't obvious: how you carry yourself, how you respond under pressure, the small details that hint at outcomes the boss didn't predict. These details might seem insignificant, but to someone trained to detect risk, they're massive. They indicate that acting against you now could trigger events the higher-ups haven't accounted for. This is why the "do not touch" label emerges before the employer fully realizes the danger. The enforcer perceives the potential fallout, the unintended consequences, the ripple effect of one wrong move, and he steps in preemptively. His understanding surpasses what's on the table, and in that gap, he acts, not out of fear, not out of defiance, but out of calculation. He knows that touching you isn't just risky. It could backfire in ways that even the person at the top can't reverse. What's remarkable about this dynamic is that you become untouchable without ever having to prove aggression. You didn't confront, intimidate, or challenge the system directly. You simply exist with enough awareness, discipline, and presence to create hesitation. That hesitation spreads upward, eventually reaching the boss, who senses something is off, but doesn't yet understand why. The enforcer's decision buys you time and space, placing you beyond immediate reach because he can see what the higher-ups cannot. In that moment, your survival isn't a result of luck. It's the enforcer's recognition of your subtle power, the kind that can't be quantified, contained, or controlled. You've become the variable that disrupts the hierarchy quietly but irrevocably, and in that quiet disruption, you gain untouchable status. Number 8, you're now categorized as a future problem, not a present one. In the world of power, timing is everything. People who operate at high levels don't always react to what exists now. They calculate what could exist tomorrow. Being labeled "do not touch" doesn't mean they've given up on you. It means they've reassessed the cost of acting and decided the immediate risk isn't worth it. You've been shifted from a current concern to a future variable, a situation they may need to address later. But for now, it's safer to step back and monitor. This distinction is crucial. Targets can be neutralized quickly because the system assumes the consequences are manageable. Future problems are different. They're unpredictable, potentially explosive, and carry fallout the enforcer can't control in real time. By marking you untouchable, they're acknowledging that acting against you now might not just fail. It could create consequences they're not equipped to handle. That hesitation is a tacit admission that you exist on a different level than they can control. Being a future problem also gives you leverage you don't even realize. Every interaction, every decision they make regarding you is filtered through the awareness that you could destabilize plans later. They watch your moves, calculate outcomes, and quietly adjust their strategies around you. You're no longer part of the system they can manipulate on demand. You've become a variable that must be accounted for carefully, and in high-level power structures, that level of influence is rare. This is where discipline and composure matter. You didn't provoke this status by confrontation or chaos. You earned it simply by existing in a way that can't be rushed, predicted, or controlled. Every restraint, every moment of awareness, every silent calculation you make compounds the enforcer's assessment. The more consistent you are, the more undeniable your presence becomes. So being a future problem isn't a warning. It's recognition. It's the system acknowledging that you have the potential to disrupt, that you matter beyond immediate calculation, and that handling you requires caution. And in that acknowledgement, you've gained a kind of untouchable power that can't be forced, bribed, or intimidated away. Number 9, your restraint scared them more than aggression ever could. Most people think power responds to force, to loudness, to visible anger or retaliation. But the truth is, restraint terrifies those who rely on control far more than aggression ever could. When someone reacts predictably, whether with panic, rage, or desperation, they fit neatly into the system. They can be manipulated, misread, and neutralized. Restraint, however, is a variable that refuses the script. It doesn't escalate. It doesn't give away intentions. It silently rewrites expectations, and that unpredictability triggers fear in the most dangerous way. Enforcers and power players operate on patterns. They track behavior, anticipate reactions, and plan accordingly. Aggression, while messy, is understandable. It's loud, it's visible, it can be countered. But restraint is invisible discipline. It's the calm under fire, the measured response, the refusal to collapse or overreact. It signals a mind that thinks several steps ahead, someone who is not controlled by impulse, who is aware of consequences and how to manipulate them quietly. That kind of presence is impossible to model. Your restraint communicates something they can't ignore. You are not just surviving. You are calculating. You are observing. You are waiting. Every word unspoken, every action withheld, every potential reaction untriggered becomes a silent weapon, and they can feel it even if they can't see it. That makes them nervous in ways aggression never could, because aggression can be confronted, bargained with, or eliminated. Restraint can't. It changes the rules of engagement entirely. This is why the "do not touch" label emerges. It isn't a concession, it's a calculation. Touching you now is no longer a straightforward path to resolution. Every action against you could spiral in ways they cannot control, all because your composure refuses to be quantified. Your restraint turned the system into something cautious, hesitant, even vulnerable. And that hesitation is powerful. It's proof that dominance doesn't always come from force, that influence doesn't always come from noise, and that sometimes surviving silently while maintaining your presence is the most threatening act of all. In their eyes, you've become untouchable, not because of what you do loudly, but because of what you do quietly. Number 10. This wasn't protection, it was containment failure. When an enforcer marks someone as untouchable, it's easy to misread it as protection, as though someone powerful decided you were off limits out of respect, caution, or mercy. The truth is far more revealing. This label exists because the system failed to contain you. They tried. They deployed every tactic, pressure point, and manipulation at their disposal, and none of it worked the way they expected. You didn't break, you didn't fold, and you didn't fall into the pattern they designed. That failure forced them to step back. It wasn't kindness. It was damage control. Containment is the backbone of high-level power. People who think in those circles build entire strategies around control. Every move, every reaction, every pressure point is meant to produce a predictable outcome. When someone refuses to be contained, the system can't operate safely. They can't manipulate your story, anticipate your reactions, or engineer the result they want. That's what happened with you. You existed outside the parameters they rely on, and that's terrifying to people whose influence is measured by precision and predictability. Enforcers don't hesitate lightly. They don't step back without calculation. When they do, it's because engaging now carries more risk than benefit. Your existence, your actions, your silent endurance, it all signaled that containing you was no longer possible without creating collateral they couldn't control. That's why they left you alone. Not because you were safe, not because they respected you, but because touching you would expose them to outcomes they could not afford to face. Being untouchable in this sense is evidence of your power. It's a recognition that you are no longer part of the system that manipulates, pressures, and controls. You broke the model they depended on. Their hesitation is not generosity, it's acknowledgement of your impact. You became the variable that the system cannot account for, the presence they cannot neutralize, and the one they cannot risk. Containment failed. That's why they're stepping back, why they're recalculating, and why in a world built on control, you've just become untouchable. Number 11. Someone above him asked one quiet question: what if we're wrong? In high-level power structures, decisions rarely happen in isolation. Every move is reviewed, calculated, and approved through layers of oversight. When an enforcer hesitates or marks someone untouchable, it's often because a single question has been quietly planted by someone above. What if we're wrong? That one question carries more weight than any threat, any aggression, or any demonstration of force. It introduces doubt into a system that thrives on certainty, and doubt in power is dangerous. When the question arises, the entire chain of command freezes just long enough to reassess. Actions that were once straightforward suddenly feel risky. Every potential consequence is reevaluated. Every assumption is challenged. They don't need to announce the doubt. It spreads quietly, subtly, like a ripple through the ranks. That ripple makes even the most confident enforcer hesitate, because acting against someone becomes not just a tactical decision, but a moral and strategic gamble. This hesitation is a recognition of your presence, your awareness, and your potential impact. You've created uncertainty, not by confrontation, but by existing with clarity and discipline. You haven't overplayed your hand, you haven't reacted recklessly, and you haven't given them the clean narrative they were expecting. That silence, that measured presence, forces even the highest level players to question their own calculations. The brilliance of this quiet question is that it doesn't just protect you, it reshapes the system's behavior. Once someone considers that they might be wrong, every future decision regarding you is filtered through that doubt. Every order is tempered by the possibility of consequences they hadn't predicted. They begin to step carefully, to pause, to recalculate. In a system built on control and certainty, your presence alone becomes disruptive. So when the enforcer hesitates and marks you untouchable, it's not luck or mercy. It's the result of doubt, a single quiet, devastating question that spreads through the ranks and freezes the machinery of power. That question acknowledges your influence, validates your caution, and ensures that you remain untouchable, at least until they can understand what they're truly dealing with. Number 12. Your existence now creates internal conflict on their side. One of the most subtle but powerful ways you disrupt a system is simply by existing. You don't have to act aggressively or make noise. Your presence alone forces the people around you to reassess everything they thought they knew. In high-level operations, enforcers and their bosses rely on certainty. They rely on patterns, predictability, and obedience. When someone like you refuses to fit neatly into the expected mold, internal conflict spreads like wildfire. Orders are questioned, strategies are second-guessed, and hesitation becomes contagious. This conflict isn't always obvious. It shows up in the smallest ways. A pause before a move, a conversation that ends without resolution, an argument over whether a risk is worth taking. People who were once confident now argue with each other because your existence has introduced doubt and uncertainty. When even one person in a chain of command hesitates, it echoes through the entire system. Decisions slow down, plans are postponed, mistakes become more likely, and all of it originates from you simply being someone they cannot control or predict. The more composed and aware you remain, the more that conflict grows. You don't feed it with reckless actions. You feed it by refusing to react in ways they expect, by standing calmly while chaos or pressure swirls around you. That calm presence becomes a mirror they can't ignore, showing every flaw in their assumptions, every weakness in their calculations. They argue, they debate, they hesitate, all because the system cannot reconcile the fact that you are untouchable and beyond immediate influence. This is the kind of power that doesn't come from intimidation or force. It comes from disruption. By simply existing, by refusing to break under pressure, you've created a structural vulnerability in their world. That internal conflict weakens their coordination, slows down their response, and forces them to act more cautiously than they ever planned. Your existence alone has shifted the balance. They can't remove you, and they can't fully control you, and that is exactly why you become untouchable in ways no direct confrontation could ever achieve. Number 13. Being untouchable doesn't mean you're safe. It means you're inconvenient. When an enforcer marks someone as untouchable, it's easy to read it as safety. It isn't. Safety implies comfort, predictability, or protection. Untouchable in this context means you've become a variable the system cannot manipulate without consequence. You are inconvenient. Every interaction, every plan, every expectation has to account for your presence because you cannot be handled like everyone else. That inconvenience is far more dangerous to those in power than outright opposition ever could be. Power thrives on clean outcomes. People, situations, and problems are expected to fit neatly into the hierarchy so that control is constant and consequences are manageable. When you refuse to comply, when you operate in a way that defies manipulation, you disrupt their workflow. You force recalculation, hesitation, and second-guessing at every level. Every action they might take against you now carries a cost they cannot quantify, and that's why leaving you alone suddenly becomes the path of least resistance. Your untouchable status signals that dealing with you is more trouble than it's worth. It's not about fear, it's about risk management. Engaging you now threatens to expose vulnerabilities, create ripple effects, or trigger consequences that ripple far beyond the immediate situation. In other words, touching you is no longer a solution, it's a liability. They've learned that avoiding you, keeping their distance and adjusting strategies around you is smarter than trying to force control. This inconvenience also amplifies your influence. While they strategize, calculate, and hesitate, you continue to move, exist, and operate freely within the space they cannot dominate. That alone changes the balance of power. Your presence forces them to adapt rather than act, to respond rather than dictate, and to respect boundaries they never intended to acknowledge. Being untouchable, then, is not about protection, it's about disruption. You've become a force that the system cannot predict, cannot control, and cannot afford to provoke. That's the real reason for the mark. You're inconvenient, and inconvenience at the highest level is far more threatening than direct confrontation ever could be. Number 14. This mark isn't the end of pressure. It's proof you outgrew intimidation. Being marked, "Do not touch," doesn't mean the storm is over. It doesn't mean the system no longer notices you, no longer weighs your moves, or no longer calculates potential threats. What it does mean is far more profound. You've outgrown the very tools that were meant to control you. Intimidation relies on predictable reactions, fear, and chaos. When someone stops responding in expected ways, when you absorb pressure, maintain composure, and navigate threats without crumbling, you no longer fit into the hierarchy of fear. That's why they back off. You've become untouchable, not because they respect you, but because fear itself cannot reach you anymore. The enforcer's hesitation is telling. Every tactic designed to break you has failed to produce results. Every calculated threat, every invisible pressure point, every attempt to manipulate outcomes has been neutralized by your awareness and restraint. The system that thrives on intimidation now recognizes a truth it cannot fight. You exist beyond its reach. That is both terrifying and disorienting for those who rely on control. This is why untouchable isn't the same as safe. You are still observed. Every move you make is noted. But unlike before, they cannot coerce you into predictable behavior. Your presence alone forces caution, recalculation, and hesitation. You've flipped the dynamic. The enforcer trembles not because you are reckless, loud, or dangerous in conventional ways, but because you are composed, unshakable, and strategically untouchable. That makes you unpredictable in the most critical way possible. Outgrowing intimidation also changes the balance of power quietly but permanently. The system that once sought to manipulate or control you now operates around you. They can no longer force outcomes without risking consequences they cannot manage. Your silence, your restraint, your awareness, these are your weapons. They've exposed the limits of fear and control, and in doing so, you've claimed a space no one can touch. Being untouchable is proof you've moved beyond their influence. You no longer react to threats. You exist above them. That is not luck. That is power, discipline, and clarity. And it's exactly why they are forced to step back, recalibrate, and acknowledge that you are no longer a player they can intimidate. You are a variable they cannot risk. Conclusion. At this level, power doesn't just step back for no reason. Every hesitation, every do not touch order, every moment of recalculation reflects a truth that most people will never grasp. You are no longer part of the system that controls, manipulates, and intimidates. Every point we've explored, from becoming a liability rather than a target, to outgrowing intimidation, to disrupting entire scripts and creating internal conflict, you've proven that your presence alone changes the rules of engagement. The enforcer isn't shaking because of physical threats or overt aggression. He's shaking because you've become unpredictable, disciplined, and strategically untouchable. You exist beyond patterns, beyond fear, and beyond their ability to calculate outcomes. This is the real power of being untouchable. It isn't about safety, and it isn't about winning a battle in the moment. It's about shifting the dynamics of control without lifting a finger. It's about forcing systems built on certainty and predictability to pause, rethink, and tread lightly, because every move against you carries potential fallout they cannot risk. You've become a presence that enforces its own boundaries, a variable that the most calculated people cannot predict, and a force that requires caution, hesitation, and respect, even when they don't fully understand why. Remember, this status doesn't come from aggression or drama. It comes from restraint, awareness, composure, and the quiet ability to survive in ways they never planned for. It comes from being calculated yet calm, disciplined yet adaptive, and always operating in a way that leaves them exposed to the consequences of their own miscalculations. This is how you claim influence without striking, how you survive without reacting, and how you force even the most ruthless systems to step back and acknowledge your presence. If this video gave you insight into the hidden dynamics of power, intimidation, and influence, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what's coming next. Drop a like if you feel the impact of this message. Leave a comment to share your thoughts or experiences, and share this with anyone who needs to understand how untouchable presence changes the game entirely. This isn't just knowledge, it's strategy, awareness, and proof that you can navigate worlds even the most calculated people fear. Don't miss being part of this conversation. Stay blessed always.